Hey there YouTube, welcome to Big Mike Beard Wisdom. So, we're back on the Gambler today, and essentially, we're going to do a quick visual inspection of the vehicle. Well, I say quick, but it might be a little bit. And it's one of those things where I live in Minnesota. Minnesota doesn't have state inspections. So what does that mean? That means that essentially, this car could have gone for who knows how many years without seeing a shop, have who knows how many components bad, and have been driven on the road in a state that would make you kind of scared that this thing was on the road with you. Now, when I lived in North Carolina, we had an annual state inspection, and it was one of those things, in order for your car to be on the road and for your plates to get renewed, you had to get the car inspected. So essentially, you knew that the car next to you on the road is relatively safe. But here in Minnesota, you don't know that. And right now, the used car market is really hot. So it's one of those things where things are moving really fast. Some things are going for a good price. So when I test drove the car, I knew this thing's got some suspension issues. I don't know exactly what the suspension issues are. And it was one of those situations where you're not in a good spot just to like jack the car up and inspect it sometimes. And some people won't even let you do it. Now sometimes, especially if you're at a dealership, they may jack it up, put it on a lift for you so you can look underneath it. My plan for the day is basically to jack the car up and do a really good inspection of the suspension, take a look at brake lines and kind of major leaks and stuff, and go from there. So not a full-on kind of like a safety inspection, but something very similar. So if you're using a jack, always be careful about lift points, and then always use jack stands to help make sure everything's nice and safe, because your jack could leak and come down, but also you need to be careful where you put your jack stands, because those can kick out and fly off and hit things, damage things, or they can actually damage the body as well. So different cars have different lift points. We're actually looking at one right now. You can kind of see, looks like Acura on the TL, at least in 2003, put the little arrow to show you where the lift point's at. Here's one of the first things that bugs me a little bit. That lift point here smashed up into the body. Now, it's not so much smashed as much as bent. So, it's kind of one of those things I might just be able to bend it right back down. Otherwise, sometimes you can lift the points with the subframe cradles. Those are good strong points too normally. So here's what it probably should look like. This is one of the rear ones. So you can kind of see the little arrow indicating it's a lift point. And you can see that's a pretty stout looking lift point. Other places you want to be careful of are little things like this. This inverted hat channel, so which some people think of as frame rails and stuff like that. It is a structural support kind of thing. Not all of them can bear weight. This is a good sign that this one shouldn't bear weight because it's pretty hollow inside. And then, especially right here, this not being solid, that should be a clear sign. But it looks like somebody at some point in time thought, hey, I'm gonna put something right there. And I think that slightly pushed up right in here. So that's kind of a bummer. The rust here is kind of a bummer. But this isn't super bad for a Minnesota car. It's got some rust on brackets that I can see. So, nice thing is the exhaust looks like it's in decent shape. Now, if you don't have jack stands or jack, you can always go to a shop and do it. It's going to cost you a little bit of money. Sometimes, if you can do it with like an oil change and tell them, hey, you just bought the car and you want another inspection. Some places do free inspections. Sometimes they do a good job, sometimes they don't. I've seen places do both. All right, so I got the front end jacked up kind of high up in the air. So plenty of room underneath the wheels. So hopefully plenty of room underneath the car for me. And then you can kind of see we're looking for anything that's rusty at like a mounting point. So something that's going to be non-repairable. As you can see, there's a lot of dirt on here. And it was down a dirt road. So that's going to make it a little bit more complicated. In order to see some of the vital areas, you might have to kind of scrub it away with your fingers and stuff. So right now what I want to see is I kind of want to feel around the ball joint boot. Just to make sure it's not tore. That's in good shape. And then what I'll go ahead and do is grab the side of the tire and shake forward and back. So you're thrusting forward and back. It's easy to do if you got two hands. But this feels pretty tight. So if that had any wobble to it, more than likely that would be like tie rod ends. And then we can either grab up here or down here and do the same. That helps you trying to figure out if you've got either loose ball joints or possibly loose wheel bearings. This side to side can help you try and figure out loose wheel bearings too. But this felt pretty tight. I'm gonna put the phone down, actually try it with both hands just to make sure everything's good and tight. All right, so real quick, I wheeled over to the driver's side because when I did it with both hands, I kind of felt a little bit of play. So when you feel kind of like a dull thud and it feels like it's after a fair amount of force is entered, go check the other side real fast because there might be a little bit of play. So right now, I'll do the side again. And the interesting thing that I saw was that I'm actually getting movement there in that ball joint. You can see, looks like this ball joint boots tore at some point in time. And I can't see it, but I can feel it. That, yep, so this is opened up, it's lost its grease, and it's probably rusted out. So there's probably a fair amount of wear in there from the rust and the metal on metal contact. And then you should be able to feel that pretty good from the the top and bottom type shakes. Whoa, that was a good one. So you can see just how much movement there is. So we know this needs an upper ball joint, maybe an upper control arm. So if I grab this really tight, I can kind of wiggle this side here forward and back. So it's possible that bushing's falling out. So otherwise it might be something where maybe just that bolt's loose. But might as well plan on the worst and just say, okay, I need an upper control arm. The nice thing about upper control arms is a lot of times they'll come with the ball joints already installed. All right, now, in order to check the side-to-side play, I can't really do it because of how much that upper ball joint moves. But what you can do is you can actually grab onto that tie rod end. So the tie rod end right there, grab onto that while trying to manipulate the wheel, and that'll allow you to feel any play in the tie rod end itself. Here's another view of the tie rod end. So this is kind of a little bit underneath the vehicle, back behind the wheel and tire. And then if I move this, everything's nice and steady. So that tie rod end's probably good. So suspension wise, it looks like it's just going to be the upper control arm on this side. Probably not a bad idea to replace the upper control arm on the other side as well, just because you always want to replace them in pairs, because everywhere that one's been, the other side has too. So just because this one failed through that boot being bad, doesn't mean the other one's boot isn't about to fail soon too. And replacing them in pairs just helps you know that both sides are good. And while I'm here, I'm just inspecting the axle, looking at the axle boot. I'm looking for grease, because grease would indicate that the axle boot is tore and slung. So I don't really see any grease. I do see some darkness on that boot on the inside. So once I slide underneath a little bit more, I'll have to try and figure out what's going on. I'm willing to bet it's probably whatever that oil leak situation is. But to finish out the suspension, I'm going to take a look at this sway bar end links right here. So here's a sway bar end link. Here's the sway bar. And then somewhere, right there, is your sway bar bushing or bracket. And essentially, if you have play in that rubber, it'll kind of cause a knocking noise, but it'll be like a more of a thudding noise. If you have play in your end links, it'll be more of a knock, a sharper sounding noise. So I'm just going to take this and push up and down, and I feel a little bit of something, but I don't see any movement here. I also don't see any movement here. So this is attached on both sides of the car, so it's back to the passenger side. Yep. So that is broken. So this sway bar Endlink is not connected. So that means that whenever you drive the car, you're not getting the spring rate working on both sides of the car to help keep the car flat, which explains what I thought when I was test driving it. Because it definitely seemed like I had a lot of sway, more so than I was expecting for an Acura TL. So that's kind of a bummer. Meanwhile, I think we pretty much know everything else is relatively okay suspension-wise on this side. Check the lower ball joint just like we did on the other side. Ignore this. That looks kind of crunchy. So essentially this is like a vibration dampener, and it looks like that's just kind of rusting, dying away a little bit. But this boot looks okay. I don't see any slung grease anywhere, so that should be fine. That looks bad, but should be relatively okay. The break in the paint here and the rust underneath isn't pretty, but you got to get really super rusty in order for that to be a problem. And all that oil over here is going to make it tough to try and figure out if there's a bad seal, but the engine oil filter is right there too. So depending on how dirty this is when someone changes this, that could dictate as to how much is actually leaking on the vehicle versus it's just oil change mess. But it looks like there might be stuff up top leaking. But real quick, I'll just grab this side, see if I can't move this up and down a little. So I don't feel anything knocking on this side. So that bit of movement that I felt over there was probably the flex from here and maybe this touching. So with this, I can probably say the actual bushings here are fine. This Endlink's toast. And then we'll probably want to replace the other Endlink on the other side as well, just to be safe. So again, suspension components in pairs. Everywhere this one's been, that one's been too. So the one thing I'm thinking, looking at this side, so I'm on the passenger side, that other side you can kind of see a little bit of metal showing. This one doesn't have a little bit of metal showing. And with this being a little bit less rusty looking, this might be a newer control arm. It's just really dirty. So may or may not replace this one. You know, it's going to be one of those things where I'm going to put, you know, 2 control arms question mark. Something else to kind of check is your brake line. So rubber lines and stuff like that, a lot of times people say 10 years. 10 years you should replace them. So just looking for this, making sure it feels nice and bendy still, not dry and cracking feeling. Also checking for leaks. Don't really see any leaks. Good look at the rest of the car. So not too bad. Not as rusty as I was expecting. But it might be due to like oil leaks helping to preserve everything. Woo. So this looks kind of bad. And I'm willing to bet this is probably brake lines or fuel lines. Alright, so rear suspension. Similar checkout as front. So checking suspension mounting points, looking for lots of rust. And same thing, so you want to try and give them a good shake. So both from the left and right and from up and down. This one with 2 hands, I'm getting a little bit of noise down here and I'll feel a little bit of give. So it's probably going to be something up to do with these bushings. Because the stuff up here, probably in better shape. I'm getting a little play in that bushing area. So what I'm going to try and do is have the camera hopefully looking at stuff while I shake it. Looks like this part here is moving. So I don't know how that came out, but from the look of it, I got a little bit of play here, a little bit of play here. So the bushing in the knuckle here and the bushing in the rod here. And then sway bars. Oh, that's a good one. So you can see on this one that I've got right here, that's loose, so that's play in it. And then again, anything rubber, you want to be kind of looking at that, seeing if it's cracking. Make sure it still moves good. This rust isn't super great, but you know, it might be kind of common for them. Looks like the backing plate is starting to rust out a little bit as well. Otherwise, a little rusty back here, but seems like most things are in place. So, not getting any movement from the sway bar bushing here. Everything here, here, and down there seems to be tight. Underneath, rust-wise, kinda trunk area right here. Ooh, this is gonna be rusty up underneath that bumper. But all in all, it's not too bad underneath. Now we're on the other side. So that one's got pretty good movement too, just right there. And just a little bit of movement like what that has is kind of a lot of movement. So now as that jitters and stuff like that, not only does it wear this fast, but also wears every other suspension component fast too, because things are moving in ways it's not supposed to be moving. Oh, there's a good one. Another broken sway bar link. This is dangerous because it's, you know, could be pointing at that. So just imagine if that had snapped and when the bar was pointed somewhere and somehow this hits the brake line there, now you got a real serious brake problem. All right, there we go. This bushing's shot. So with this having play in it, this is a problem. Now, bushings are pretty easy to replace. It all depends on how they go in, how rusty the car is and stuff. But same thing, normally bushings are sold in pairs. Rarely are bushings sold just one. So, looks like sway bar end links and bushings for the rear. Maybe sway bar upgrade. Depends on where I'm going with the car. But luckily, the exhaust looks pretty good for its age. Where it joins together here is pretty rough. But otherwise, it's in pretty decent shape. Alright, so every car is going to be a little different. Suspension is going to be designed a little bit different. engine layout, drivetrain, that kind of thing. But a lot of what I did is essentially going to be the same. So the holes on the tires to try and figure out what's loose, checking and grabbing things to see what's loose, looking for rusty spots, trying to track down oil spots. So all that's going to be kind of the same on each one, and it's going to give you an idea what you need. I'd recommend writing everything down. That way you can go and price it out later. Because now it's going to come down to things like, is it worth replacing this component? Is it worth doing this? Is it worth doing that? Are you better off maybe taking the car and stripping it down and selling parts? So if the engine's in good shape, but the transmission's toast, is it better just to pull the engine, sell it, and either get a whole new drivetrain from something else, or scrap the car while also selling all the other usable components? Headlights, grills, doors, bumpers, you name it. So this is mostly for the suspension, checking for leaks and looseness. So anything visually that makes sense. And then keep your list running, because you may find more things as you keep going. The more you look at the car, the more you may notice more things that you want to fix or things that you should note. But for now, we know we need at least one upper control arm in the front. We need the front sway bar end links. We need the rear sway bar end links. And we need a bunch of weird bushings in the back. So, hope you guys enjoyed the video. Feel free to like and subscribe. I'll check you next time.